that segues into our weather outlook today from Dr. Moore, who's going to tell us what the weather is looking like.
Well, thank you for that, and good morning to everyone. We've had some very exciting weather very recently passing through the region. Of course, I think we all saw some pretty extreme results from Hurricane Beryl. It was, at that point, I guess it's extratropical cyclone Beryl moving through the area. But this shows the rainfall that fell from Beryl, and you can see that it's very strongly concentrated along a northeast to southwest gradient. And we were talking about precipitation amounts just before this virtual breakfast got started, and there were values ranging from 5 inches to 0.8 inches. So it's been kind of all over the map, but it's been a really big driver of changes to recent soil moisture. In fact, here's some very high soil moisture right here in East Lansing. Some significant flooding all throughout that region, and even worse in parts further to the south. That storm has now moved through and is continuing to push out towards the east, and it's been altering the flow of a lot of air masses, as we'll see a little bit later, that are coming into the area. The current conditions, looking at where we are in terms of drying and wetting trends, we're seeing that we've got quite a bit of we're pretty close to normal across the region here. If we look at the previous week of rainfall, there wasn't a whole lot of rain that really hit Michigan. There was a little bit more to the north, and of course it's been pretty significant rainfall towards as you get closer to Iowa. And even looking at the previous month of data, we see a very noticeable trend towards wetter conditions to the west and drier conditions to the east. But of course, the big event here was the track of hurricane extratropical cyclone Beryl. And you can see this large red stripe of intense rainfall that largely happened in the southern lower peninsula, with very small amounts for the past week concentrated across the rest of Michigan. In the context of how things have been lately, I don't know if you were here 2 weeks ago. I talked about how southern and southeastern Michigan was drier than normal. What we're seeing here is that the recent event has really knocked back a lot of the lower amounts of precip that happened, lower amounts of soil moisture that got knocked back by the precip. So we're starting to see less of a bullseye of drier conditions here in the southeastern part of Michigan. The UP is showing fairly wet conditions up there. If we look at the minimum temperatures, then as we start to think about soil moisture conditions, we can see that we're well above normal for minimum temperatures since April, really. So it's been a very warm and easy start to the spring. I know there was a lot of worry about early buds for fruit crops, and that those fears have gone away since it has stayed remarkably warm and consistently above schedule since then. Looking then at soil moisture conditions, we're currently meeting maximum water demands pretty much across the state. There are a few dry spots. There was a sort of a dry bullseye here in southeastern Michigan, and it's largely gone away because of the massive amounts of rain from Beryl that dropped through. The UP is showing some very wet conditions here in the south, and in the center of the lower peninsula, there's also some very high levels of soil moisture. If we look at PET, we can see that the soil temperature levels are pretty consistently nicely into the 70s, with slightly cooler in the UP. So soil temperatures are nice and warm, and the crops are happy. Crops are moving ahead pretty quickly. The big warmer conditions to the south we've largely been protected from the warming and the drying that's been rough for some of the states to our south. Here's the numbers on PET. You can see it's nicely and comfortably in the green in both the lower peninsula and the upper peninsula. So not a lot of water stress. It's very, very good water conditions here. Looking at growing degree days that integrate from May all the way up into July to now. We're well over 100 growing degree days and even getting here towards 150 in the southeastern um, part. A little bit, quite a bit further behind in the UP. But we're starting to see signs that the warming patterns are really, really early, really far ahead of where we normally are. There's a nice little article by Mark Torregosa saying, good news so far for Michigan's fruit crops after a too early flowering. So cherries, I think they're pretty much harvested now. They were 10 days early. It's looking like apples, maybe 10 to 15 days early because of all the consistent warm early weather. And I also saw some data that sugar beets are in excellent condition. The USDA reports for good and excellent corn. Here you can see in the red line is 2024 that we're in very good shape for corn, looking kind of like 2021. A lot of this is weather driven, and what we're seeing coming down the road looks like we're going to continue on into very supportive weather. So our current conditions here are looking like, the low from extratropical cyclone Beryl has moved on into the eastern U.S. and the Maritimes. And we're going to have this small low pressure system here slide in and maybe create a little bit of precipitation a bit later in the southern part of Michigan. There's a lot of humidity in the air. There's no cold air mass behind Beryl. You probably think you're probably expecting, okay, we had this big rain event. It should be in cool and low humidity conditions for a while. That's probably not going to happen. That you're going to see some higher temperatures and higher dew points as we move in. So you can see Hurricane Beryl sliding off there, and you can see that there's a small mesoscale convective complex type disturbance over Iowa that's going to move into our area, at least into southern Michigan, over the next day or two. And that leads us to looking at the forecast conditions to try to understand, well, what's the weather going to unfold like with this sort of highly discombobulated weather map. So looking ahead, we can look at the upper air pattern. You can see that here's Michigan, of course, and here is the jet stream pushing the remnants of Beryl out to sea. And you can see that there's a very strong thermal ridge out here to the west. There's a little bit of a disturbance here. There's some unstable cold air aloft. And as that part of the ridge moves into the Great Lakes area, there can be some precipitation and thunderstorms that get kicked off by that. I'm not looking for a lot of rainfall as a result of that, but dew points could get up into the 70s, and afternoon thunderstorms could certainly develop, but it'll be kind of small potatoes in terms of rainfall events. If we look at the kind of the weather that's being steered, so if we think of this 500 millibar flow, you can see what's being steered here. The steering is going to be bringing whatever weather is underneath it, and there's a large high pressure dome out here over the west. Maybe you've seen about the heat concerns in Seattle and Oregon and parts west. So there's not a lot of heavy rainfall until this system here rolls into town. So I'd like to actually try to do something tricky here for just a second. I'd like to share my screen. So this shows you the weather that we're expecting to see roll through. Here is Thursday into Friday, so some rainfall in Michigan here on Friday. Not much going on through the bulk of Friday, but as we get into Sunday, Saturday, Sunday, this frontal system comes in and dumps maybe 1.5 inches across much of Michigan. in advance of this larger precipitation system. And let me pause it here. That Tuesdays will be an actual cold front that's coming through, and you can see that the UP is going to probably get quite a bit of precipitation, and that frontal system will also help kick off some significant behavior for further out in the week. Now, this is the European model. It tends to perform a little bit better looking out. So this is looking out to Thursday of next week, but you can see the North American monsoon is starting to kick off, and there might be some significant weather before we have this virtual breakfast next week. So I wanted you guys to be aware of how that might happen. Yeah, so looking at Friday, there might be a little bit of afternoon thunderstorms because of instability higher aloft. I don't expect that to be widespread, and mostly I think will be in western Michigan. And then the cold front, it's harder to figure out where that's going to roll out, given a lot of the factors related to Beryl, former Hurricane Beryl moving off. But you expect to see higher dew points after the weather moves through Friday, probably higher dew points actually Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then on into Tuesday. There's some possibility of some thunderstorms out there. But I'm not looking at very high amounts of rainfall. If you look at this map, looking at here at Michigan, we're looking at half an inch, quarter of an inch of rainfall, mostly coming through over the next 7 days. And what we're expecting to see, well, this is that heat that we've been seeing out in the western states, and then that's going to sort of slide to the north, and we're going to have a little pool of cooler air after the cold front comes through on Monday, Tuesday, like that. And that's kind of what we're expecting. If you look at the probability of exceedance maps, last time, 2 weeks ago, I showed the seasonal outlook that we're expecting a much warmer western, much warmer conditions in the west and a little bit towards the far eastern part of the U.S. That we're actually seeing that pattern is pretty strongly developing. Much higher probabilities of hot weather over the Great Basin, but sort of weather as normal, sort of a very predictable year, predictable July for Michigan here. If there is any higher probability, maybe it's just 60% instead of 50-50 for Michigan having warmer than normal July, August, September temperatures. So in a nutshell, it's unseasonably cool right now, thanks to Beryl. We can expect some transitional showers Friday night. I wouldn't expect a whole lot of rain. And then again, Monday with some afternoon thunderstorms. And then it'll be warmer with higher dew points. You'll feel the moisture in the air. And then there will be a front coming along in Monday and Tuesday. So we might expect to see some, again, looking a little bit further out towards the end of July, we'll start to see some changes from that weather that's coming around from the North Pacific. And I would expect to see, as we move into the later half of July, that we'll start to see the warm and cold air patterns moving through pretty quickly with some moderating temperatures. And I expect the heat to continue to pick up in about 2 weeks.